So, like thinking of your mindset of actually genuinely wanting to expand sort of, the field of science to get people more jobs, to make this science a bigger part of this country rather than sort of aiming to go for monetary gains. How do you think a company runs differently in that sense? A company that focuses more on selling their product and gaining money and gaining stature compared to a company that focuses on advancing research and creating more jobs?
Well, we have to do both, right? So yeah. So we have we have a spectrum of people, of course. So there are people who are actually doing product development, and but the products have to be sold. So we have about 300 people doing sales, and half of those people are PhDs,
yeah.
Which and it's a I tell people, we're not selling stuff. We're not pushing products at anybody. No, we have to do a needs analysis. You go into a lab, you ask, how we can help you and see what's needed, and then you offer a product, right?
Yeah.
But you have to realize that selling to scientists they're said to be the most difficult group of people to sell to in the world, and that's because they're so critical, right? So
yes.
If you go and say this product is, we'll do this, and their immediate reaction will, well, why doesn't it do that? Or why does it take so long? It's immediately are critical. So you have to make sure that the customer really wants to know, that really wants to tell you what they're doing and see if you can help them. So you have to build a relationship with them that is not controversial, where you're getting into a sort of a critical thing. And so there's a book written on how to sell to scientists, which I thought was really clever. And we actually invited the guy to come to STEMCELL and run some courses on it. And I learned a lot from him, because it just made my life so much better with my wife, right? Who is a scientist, right? You see, and so I don't say to her, Connie, look outside. Looks like it's a really nice day, because she'll say, no, there's a cloud over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So immediately sense is criticism, right? So now what I say is, oh, Connie, I wonder what it's like out today, right? So she has to make the commitment to look out the window and say, right? So I've engaged her in a talk about the weather without getting into sort of an argument over the subtleties of, like, how much cloud is there and what's that really mean? You can go down a rabbit hole over these details, right? So that book and the way of selling to scientists has been very helpful to me personally, and that's good. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So
well,
when you
I'm going to say there are a whole bunch of other jobs, of course. I just talk about sales, but sales are really interesting, because our salespeople are knowledgeable, and when they go into a lab, they get to know what the person is doing. So they're staying in touch with cutting edge science, right? So you're seeing what the leaders in the field are doing, and you're staying very close to the science, which, a lot of people think, well, you go into industry, somehow you're going to lose touch with that. No, in doing sales for us is you are right there at the cutting edge of science all over the world. So it's and of course we have our salespeople broken down in two classes. There are people, field reps, who actually go out and talk to people, field representatives, and then we have inside sales as well, who plot, like where are the best institutions to go to, and so on, right? And that's linked up with marketing, where we're have come up with all the designs and stuff of our products and how they're described, and of course we have a video team that makes videos, because seeing is believing, and a lot of people don't read the directions, so it's very handy to have a video that shows you how to use a product.
That is really real. Yesterday, I had to Google a YouTube video of how to easy set, and it's there.
Yeah,
it's really real.
right.
And it works.
Exactly. And now we're doing training courses too. So we do a lot of training courses, and of course, because of the COVID thing and lockdown, you can't do that. But it's worked out really better. So one of our guys has figured out how to do streaming video. So basically, in a hood, where everybody would crowd around and try to look into the hood and see what somebody was doing. No, we've got several cameras positioned in the hood, and they're doing the demonstration live to people anywhere in the world, right? And so they worked out that, and they've got a way of actually, controlling the which camera's on and not, and you can take questions and explain exactly what you're doing. So the live streaming is a whole new way of helping people. So we have an education group and a tech support group that are all about helping people. We have about 40 or 50 people who actually do that. They're answering the phone, and then they take the questions and answer them, and depending on how that goes, but always being available is something we want to do. We're about 24. We want to be 24/7, but we're not. We're probably about 5 days a week, but we're pretty global now. So so anybody in the world has a problem, we can help you, and that's where we want to be.
Yeah.
And because a lot of people are doing stuff they really don't know how to do it, right? And so and they sort of plunge into it, and they get it wrong, and then they phone up and say, well, your product doesn't do it the way you said it was. So we have to be very polite and say, yeah, well, let's just tell me what you did, and then go over the procedure, and then, so maybe if you'd done it this way, that wouldn't have been a problem. But let me also show you how we do it, right? And then you can show them a video or take them on a live streaming, course. So that's very, so people would like to help people. That's a great job for them too, right? So and it's a lot of fun. So we have funny stories and stuff, people doing things that are not right. Something reflect that, right? You're doing the easy set pour off, right? You have to just write. So there's a funny video on that actually, which is you don't want to touch the tube to the other tube that you do, right? So you do it so carefully, right? You don't want to overdo it, and then you get the right result, right? So yeah.
There seems to be a whole different strategy with sort of trying to help and market to scientists, and you hire people with PhDs just to sort of relate to this job. But when you first sort of started STEMCELL, or even before that, trying to fund the Terry Fox Labs, selling media off to other groups, how did you first sort of, I don't want to say capitalize, but how did you first sort of get started on selling media, and how did you sort of establish yourself as someone trustworthy and reliable for media?
Well, it started when I was a graduate student in Toronto. There was a guy there, Paul Yeager, who was a very compulsive, Austrian who did everything right, and then he took retirement and came out to Vancouver, and after I was here, right, and he came to me, and being a compulsive sort of Germanic type, he couldn't retire. He had to do something, right? So.
Yeah.
So he said to me, I need a job. I need to do something. I said, okay, well, why don't you start making media here in Vancouver, and we'll sell it around the city. And he did, and it worked. It worked really quite well for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, and then Thermo Fisher came out with media at half the price that was already made up, right? But up until that time, everybody had to make up their own media, right? You had to have you had to get the powder, have sterile water that was pure, and you had to filter sterilize it, right? So and sometimes things didn't get sterilized or things went wrong, right? So people were interested in getting pre-made media, and that's what we started doing here. And then along came Invitrogen, or Thermo Fisher at the time, or later. Anyway, and so they were selling it at half the price. We were selling it at about $15 to $18 a bottle. They were selling it at about $8 or $9 a bottle. So that was my first business experience, and it failed basically, right?
Yeah.
but we helped people for quite a while, and also we did still went on, did special formulations and stuff. So Paul Yeager was very good about understanding, how to get everything dissolved and all the basic raw materials into media. So that was good, but it wasn't. It didn't make that much money, but what really did make money is when we needed erythropoietin to grow the red cell colonies. You see, Connie was working on red cell, getting red cell progenitors to grow, and it was a time when there were all these different, we're trying to figure out the different growth factors. I'm talking back in the 70s or 80s, right?
Yeah.
And getting a pure source of erythropoietin was impossible, actually. The only source of erythropoietin was actually made by my PhD supervisor in Toronto and a colleague. And what they did at Connaught Labs, they had radiated a flock of sheep lethally, and just before the animals all died, they bled them to death. And that was the only source. They died of anemia, right? So they were very anemic, right? And then they bled them, and then they did a little bit of purification, but that was the only commercial source of erythropoietin, and it was all mixed up with all the other growth factors because the sheep were sick when they died, right? I mean, yes. So we tried to make erythropoietin ourselves, and in fact Keith Humphreys and Jerry Crystal were all over this too, right? And so we tried to. We thought, okay, we'll immunize a chicken, and we'll get antibodies instead of a column that we can use the antibodies to pull off the hemoglobin, right? And we injected about $5,000 of erythropoietin into this chicken, and then the thing died of an anaphylactic reaction, right? So that's so that didn't work, right?
Yeah.
And then Jerry figured out a way of actually purifying it on these large columns and stuff, and we developed a way of purifying that, and that was really what got us going, because we were able to sell now purified erythropoietin, and that was good, and people really started to buy it because it was pure, relatively pure, and you could detect the different growth factors and so on. And so that was good, and we made some money selling that, and that helped to buy equipment and actually give startup packages for new staff members in the Terry Fox Lab. So that was good, and also allowed us to buy the very best batches of fetal calf serum and BSA and stuff like that as well. So yeah, so that was good. And then of course Amgen came along, and we were collecting human urinary erythropoietin. I mean, I jokingly say, urine is one of the world's great untapped natural resources. There's a lot of stuff in there, right?
Yeah, of course.
But there, if you're really anemic, you would excrete erythropoietin in your urine, and we had a few patients that were very anemic, and these are older people who had myelodysplastic syndrome. Their marrow was pooping out, and they get transfusions, but then they'd make antibodies to the red cells, and so they couldn't maintain a reasonable hemoglobin, and so you have to have a hemoglobin about 5 or less, which is, if any of us had that hemoglobin, we wouldn't be able to stand up. We just faint.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So they sort of got used to it, and so I put a freezer in some of these few patients, and we collected all our urine and froze it, and that's the way we actually. And we had a technician who was very good at doing the purifications, and we got pretty good erythropoietin, and that was good. And then but then at the same time, people were in Chicago, some of our colleagues, they were doing the same sort of thing, but getting a whole lot of erythropoietin. And then they got enough to get the protein sequence and then the genetic sequence, and that was the basis of Amgen. So I thought, oh my God, when Amgen comes out with EPO, it's going to be cheap, and we'll have to, we'll lose this little market that we had. And so we said, well, why don't we set up selling media with the erythropoietin and all the other growth factors to get really good growth of both red cell colonies and granulocyte colonies. And so we set that up and started selling that. We called it Ready Mix because it gave really nice red cell colonies, and it was sort of like Ready Mix cement, the goo, the methylcellulose is sort of gooey, right, like cement.
Yeah.
Oh, so that was and I placed one ad in the journal Blood, and sales took off, and everybody started buying, and they still buy it, and because it standardized the field. Up until that time, people were making all their own media, and it was very difficult to compare the results of one lab to another, right? And
Exactly.
So now there was a standard, and people could compare what they were doing to that standard, and then they also just said, well, why are we making up our media? Things go wrong. This is really good media. We'll just use that. So that was good, and I wasn't really thinking of taking it any further than that, but the board of directors of the cancer agency or the foundation at the time, they thought we should form a company, and they sort of pushed me to form a company, which really I wasn't really thinking of doing, and that's how STEMCELL actually started. So I had to negotiate with them. They were all lawyers and accountants. They sort of knew what they were doing. I didn't think this was really worth all that much. They thought it was worth something. So basically, we negotiated for about 6 months every month, and I had to hire some accountants to help sort of balance what they were saying and stuff.
Yeah, of course.
After a while, we came to an agreement, and so I bought the business from them for $600, $600,000, no, $6,000. $6,000. So, and that was that was the beginning of STEMCELL, and of course the money all went back to support Terry Fox Lab. It was it was 600,000. What am I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
It was 600,000 we paid for the company, right? So
Yeah.
that money went back to support the Terry Fox Lab, which was what I wanted to do anyway. And I didn't think much would happen actually. So but just kept making media, and people kept buying it, and I didn't pay much attention to it for quite a while, and then it just kept growing. So I hired a few people to do the sales and stuff, and rest is history. So it's been good.
Miss me. So, I mean, in your sort of experience, what was the most challenging thing to start up? Was it a challenge setting up the Terry Fox Laboratories, STEMCELL, or your own laboratory back at the BC Cancer Research Center?
Yeah, well, all those were challenges. I mean, when Connie and I first came out, that we were in the old McGavin Bakery, right, which was where that empty lot is next to the Cancer Research Center, right?
Yeah.
It was just a warehouse, we didn't have any money, and so we wrote a grant for the National Cancer Institute, and the money was so small, and they fought so hard on this. And I wanted a computer, right? I wanted to track patients and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they said, no, I couldn't have a computer, right?
Yeah.
And it was sort of pitiful, right? And when you think about it now, right? And we were just this small group, and there was basically Connie, myself, Keith, Jerry, and Dagmar Kalusik, and Fumio. That was it. And and it was it was great. We had a great little group, but virtually no money, right? So
Exactly.
so I had to spend a lot of time trying to find donors, and the head of the cancer agency was very helpful, David Boyce, in helping us get donors and stuff like that. But and then Terry Fox made his run, right? And we got $1 million from that. And that was we were very fortunate. That seemed like a lot of money in those days. But that built labs in this old warehouse, and that was good. But it was pretty primitive, to be quite honest. But we had a lot of fun, and it was good. So yeah,
Yeah.
so it was the early days, and yeah, it was difficult. But there's never enough money for doing research, right? So it's always been trying to make money to support all the other things
Yeah.
you want to do, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned it several times about how difficult it's always is to acquire funding, and how much more funding is required. But how do you think funding, since back in your day trying to start up your own lab, has changed compared to now? Is it easier? Is it more difficult?
I think it's a little more difficult, to be honest. Actually, I mean the amounts of money that the federal government has put towards research over the last 10 years has not increased very much. That's my understanding, and I'm sure that's and yeah, it's there's not enough money, right? And that's a problem. So, but that's why I got into business, because there is money there. so, so yeah, so I mean, I have to listen to Connie whining and complaining about
funding. Yeah.
no, but I don't, right? So it's sort of nice, and I mean, even in stem cell, you never have enough money, right? But
Exactly. Yeah.
It's more possible. Yeah.
I mean, well, so I mean, throughout your career, I mean, scientists always have this fear, fear of not being able to publish, fear of getting scooped in their research, fear of not getting employment. So was your fear always about funding? Was that always your struggle throughout life, or have you found other sort of adversities that you sort of had to?
Well, yeah, well, it was always, but we were quite successful. I mean, we had a great team. I mean, we wrote good grants, and we accomplished what we said we were going to do and stuff. So in fact, the grant that we started it with is still active today, being renewed and renewed, right? So it's yeah, so so yeah, so it's yeah, so yeah. I mean, to be honest, the Terry Fox Lab has been very successful, given the amounts of funding, especially, and the support that we have, right? I mean, it's done amazingly well, to be honest.
So does your mindset sort of have to change in terms of your focus or your scientific focus when you run stem cell compared to the Terry Fox labs, or compared to your own lab? Does your focus or what niche you sort of pursue have to change, or how does it change as you sort of transition between these companies or departments?
Well, we started out, of course, selling media for hemopoiesis, studies in hemopoiesis, right?
Yeah.
And then after a while, we needed other products, so we got the cell separation system, licensed that from Peter Landstorp, and that's been very successful. And then we got into more and different types of medias, and then we got into instrumentation and so on. So the thing has grown pretty significantly, right? So but there's a lot of work has to go into, even when you have an idea from like an academic idea of, they actually make the product and make it in a way that's really robust, and that it's going to work, and it has a shelf life of at least a year. Like nobody wants to get a tube of media that says it's got a two-week left shelf life on it, right?
Exactly.
So all the work that goes into making media is quite. It takes a long time. It takes a couple of years to make each media, to be honest, and test it all, and get all the raw materials and source them, and have them all screened so that they work and they're good, and that and ideally you want to have multiple suppliers of those in case one of the suppliers goes belly up, right? So it's a lot of work, and our media is expensive, but it works, right? Because of the quality and work that we've put into it. So yeah, so it's it's good. I forgot, what was the question you were asking me?
No, I was just, it was just more of a question of when you sort of are spearheading stem cell versus trying to acquire funding for Terry Fox Labs or your own lab, your scientific focus, how does that change?
Well, yeah, okay, yeah. Well, I mean, when you're writing grants, you're writing for a grants panel to adjudicate them in a positive way. Right? When you're making products, you're making them for customers, and so you keep them happy, right? So that's, but we have to keep our customers happy, right? And it's all about customers, right? So
yeah.
So that's what you have to be very careful of. Yeah. So
And
it's totally different mindset, right?
Yeah. And, for people or future employees that are currently in graduate school, when they go into academia versus when they enter industry, does that same mindset happen of your scientific focus shifting towards how do you sell scientific product versus how do you, or what sort of niche do you go into research to publish?
Yeah, well, I mean, getting publications is totally different than getting than making a product and getting it totally worked through so that we know we can keep producing the same way. It's going to be, standardized and robust. It's going to be, and then get all the marketing material that supports it. Why do you use it? How do you use it? And so on, right? And so it's a lot of work. I mean, in many ways, that's like writing a thesis. You really got to know your product. You got to be able to write it up, and then you got to be able to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
So, and the scientist usually does a certain amount of training and talking to customers as well, right? But the satisfaction, I think, is higher when you get a publication and it sort of goes off into the ether. Yes, you look at how many people refer to it and stuff like that, and if it's a really good paper, you're going to get a lot of positive feedback. But there's a lot of stuff that you publish that is not, it's sort of okay. It isn't getting people too excited, but when you make a product and people start to buy it, and you can see that they like it, and they are asking questions how to use it properly, and there's a certain excitement about it. My understanding is from our employees that there is maybe more satisfaction that than there is in actually doing the academic side of things. So things happen faster, and the feedback is more immediate. So so there's definitely it takes about a year for people to actually change their mindset to that.
Yeah.
And to start, because when you first go into stem cell, you don't really understand what you're supposed to do, right? It's sort of a little awkward, right? Well, want some new products, right? Well, what am I supposed to do? Well, there's things that you're going to be mentored and coached on how to do, right?
Yeah.
But and then after a while, you take it over, and then you're also talking to leaders in the field who you're working with very closely. Like we do more development than we do true research, because I mean. We work with leaders in the field who've come up with new products, but their products don't really work very well. They've got some ideas and they patented it probably, but we take the patent, we license it, and then we work it up and make it into a real product, and that takes a year or two for most products, right?
Yeah.
In fact, it can take much longer. Like when we worked with Hans Clevers in the organoid business, right? So that took 5 years actually to get really robust products that would really grow, like start intestinal organoids to start with, right? So and he was having trouble reduplicating his results as well, right? So so it was all about the components that went in, and especially Wnt and how that worked and so on, right? And so it took us, best part of 4 years, 3 or 4 years to really figure it out. And then it takes another year or two to actually get the product out there and made, and then getting people to use it, and then starting to get publications on it, right? So it takes, 5 years, maybe 5 or 6 years for that product. I mean, but it usually takes a couple of years to make a product and another year or two to actually get people to use it. And then it gets into publications, and then you can see what the potential is. So it takes several years to know whether you've really got a winner. But we make all sorts of products, and some of them don't sell very well, but they're useful to people, right? So
Yeah.
we're off into all sorts of different areas. Now we got a whole bunch of organoids. I mean, organoids is what we're sort of big in right now, and it's amazing, all these structures that now you can see the relationship between cells in this little organoid, whereas when you're growing stuff on a dish, it's you don't have that relationship, right? So it's a whole new area in terms of the science, and then how do you take pictures of it using confocal microscopes and getting all the right dyes and things to make it really nice so you can actually see the different cell types and how they're interacting. It's a lot of fun and very satisfying, and then people start buying it, right? And they want it, and they call you up and say, "This is great," it
Yeah.
really works,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there's a lot of satisfaction in doing that, and then going to meetings. Of course, we don't get invited to give plenary sessions, but we do a lot of posters, right? And so there's a lot of feedback when you go to meetings. In your poster, people come to see your poster, right? And you get to talk to people, and there's a lot of feedback, positive feedback there, right, too, as well. And you get to know people, right? And you build a relationship with them, because most people don't know how to use a lot of the things that we have, and so they need to be helped, and that's rewarding. You can see people actually starting to get the interesting results. Now we have to be careful we don't compete with our customers, right? We provide them with the media. How they use it, that's up to them, right? We don't want to compete with them, even though we could see a lot of how you would use it, and we can help them how to use it better, right? So that's where we get a lot of feedback, and that's very satisfying.
Yeah, and it seems that your scientific sort of passion doesn't wade away, and business doesn't sort of seem to take it over. A lot of people sort of seem to think that when you enter industry, you sort of have to have more of a business mindset rather than a scientific mindset.
No,
but it does sort of seem to meld together quite well. And I mean, given that people have been have seemed to be more satisfied with them selling their product compared to publishing a paper that might just sort of wade away. For you, has running STEMCELL sort of been more satisfying than while you were running a lab or being a physician? Has STEMCELL been sort of the most fulfilling part of your career?
It's hard to weigh those. It's hard to weigh those things.
Of course, yeah.
I enjoyed being a physician.
Yeah,
because you were helping people, right? But I got into oncology, right? Because I thought that was really needed a lot of work, right? But then it turned out it was research, right? Well, it is very difficult to do. You can't treat patients and do really good science. The two things are really separate.
Yeah.
And so I moved away from. And I moved away from actually seeing patients, and I became largely an administrator, right? And that was basically built the Marrow Transplant Program here and stuff like that, and help people who were actually doing the work get the resources and the support they needed to and for us to expand it and make it into something, right? And then the same with the Terry Fox Lab, getting money and resources. So I became an administrator to a large extent.
Sure.
And that's satisfying too, right? I mean, there's a lot of, because you can, especially if you're helping people achieve their dreams, you know, or helping people develop new therapies, right? Or giving them the tools to develop new therapies, as bone marrow transplantation was. So that was very satisfying. But I have to say, you know, there was a lot of conflict too, because you know, you're dealing with the healthcare system where there isn't definitely not enough money. I mean, this is a huge cost center, and they really don't want to support new things like bone marrow transplant. I mean, that was you know, something they didn't want to do. So we had to send a patient off to Seattle, came back with a bill of, you know, $350,000.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and more people were going to needing this sort of therapy, right? So they gave us a budget for the first year of $350,000. That was a provincial budget for doing bone marrow transplant, you know,
Yeah.
facilities and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time getting the budget going, getting you know, special rooms and so on, and the staffing and everything. So that was satisfying, but a fair amount of conflict with
Definitely, yeah.
administrators and the government, right? Because you're trying to make these cases, right? And they don't want to spend any money. They don't have the money, or, you know, there's just a lot of things, you know, that they're already spending money on, right? So something new is not really appreciated, unless it does something very dramatic, of course, then they can run around and brag about it. But
Yeah.
so yeah, but in industry, it is simpler, right? At least from my point of view. And so it's more, I've got more satisfaction in industry than I have in, yeah, it's hard to say, you know.
Of course.
I liked it all. I liked it all. I mean, you know, treating patients was great, because you were talking to people, and I always had a funny story to come back and tell my wife after the end of the day. I mean, you know, there was something funny, you know. I mean, you know, these are interesting characters often, right? So,
Yeah.
and then you go into research, and you're sitting there, and you know, most things don't work. It could be rather depressing, right? And you're not talking to anybody new. It's just the same sort of thing, right? So there's a, you know, but if you really do make a breakthrough, it's pretty exciting, right? So yeah. So all these things, there's satisfaction in everything, but you have to decide how you're going to be satisfied, and you know, you have to set your own standards, basically, right?
Yes.
You know, so yeah, but I'm having a ball. I'm right now.
I could tell.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I got all kinds of people that are you know, enthusiastic and full of ideas, and you know, I run it like a graduate training program. I mean, people have a lot of freedom to do whatever they want, and we're getting into all these different areas. So we have like, so we basically the company's broken down into tissue specific areas. So we got you know start off with hemopoiesis, then we got into breast and prostate and lung and cardiac, and you know, pancreas, and you know, all the major tissues. We're making tissue culture media for, understanding what people are using them for, and now this organoid thing has become huge, and of course we're in the embryonic and induced pluripotent stem cell business. I mean, that's still our biggest product, actually, is selling media for growing iPS and cells and various pluripotent stem cells. So, but you know, it's constantly, there's a lot of competition out there, other companies doing it. So we're constantly we're screening our media against other competitors and making it better, and trying to figure out how to always make it better, and different uses. And now you know, another thing is we've got all these pluripotent stem cells. How do you get them to differentiate down into specific tissues, right? And so working on all that is what we're also very busy doing, right? So it's very satisfying, and when we talk, there's no competition between people. So like this morning, we had a meeting. There were probably, so every morning, pretty well, there's a meeting discussing different areas, and there are like, you know, somewhere between 40 and 60 people at a meeting, right? And then they all come on and start asking questions and stuff. I mean, everybody's working from home, or occasionally they're in the lab to do the work, but the idea is to prevent people from getting, you know, COVID. everybody that possibly can work from home is working from home, right? So, but it's freed up. You know, it's easier to have a meeting in some ways, and you can have a whole lot more people at a meeting, right? So, but there's all this exchange of ideas of how, you know, how do you make medias for different for all these different tissues, and sharing the you know what works and what doesn't work and stuff. It's pretty exciting and very collaborative. So
Yeah.
so I think there's a lot of satisfaction there in working. Well, first of all, a tissue-specific team, which everybody is part of, but then between teams and comparing results between different tissues and understanding, you know, why cells grow and don't grow and like to grow and what makes them differentiate or not, and so on, is all being shared. And so there's a lot of knowledge that is shared amongst a fairly large group of young, enthusiastic people who are very keen to, you know, make the world a better place. So it's a great environment.
Yeah, and that's very promising for, I mean, most of these participants are all graduate students or postdocs, sort of curious as to how, you know, or curious as to where to go after their PhD and sort of find their way. And so we're sort of reaching the end of our interview period. There are quite a few questions from the audience that people are sort of curious to ask you about. And so Laura, would you like to pick your favorite ones?
Yeah. Okay, there are a lot of questions actually. So I'll start with one that caught my eye. Well, the first one, which I think is a short answer because you already kind of mentioned it, is that why is the name STEMCELL Technologies if it has a lot of different areas and if it's working in a lot of different fields?
Yeah, well, we started off STEMCELL Technologies because that was what we were doing back with understanding the stem cells in the blood forming system, right? And that, but you know, that was back in the 70s and 80s, right? And then of course the name, then you know, embryonic stem cells came out, and that was very exciting. But then there was a lot of negative stuff around that, right? And so the name was, we sort of suppressed the name, but we didn't change the name because our customers knew that name, right? And then we've grown with the name. So the name is, it's I use the analogy like Microsoft, okay? One of the largest companies in the world, Microsoft, little software company, right? So the name is no longer appropriate, right? And who cares? Nobody even thinks about it, right? Oh, Microsoft, right? So I think stem cell, and we joined the word together, so it was one word, and we sort of, you know, branded it with the capitals and stuff, right? So it's becomes a word that signifies the company, but its meaning is you know, lost in history, right?
In history.
Yeah. Okay. So like Microsoft. Yeah.
Okay, another question. I will say the name now because there are two types of questions when they put their name on the question authorship and then they decide to remain anonymous. Andrew Wu has a question that where do you see stem cell in the next 5 to 10 years? And how does the company plan to stay competitive against other similar biotechnology companies? And do you plan to expand into other fields in the future?
Well, yes. So I mean, stem cell grows at about 20% a year, and we had a rough year this last year because when the labs closed down for COVID, people didn't need our products, right? But now labs are opening up, sales are coming back. They're better than they were before. So we're back on about, we're going to be growing again at 20% a year, and that means, I mean, we've got like 160 open positions right now. Okay, so we're growing. Okay, so over the and if we just keep this growth rate up, we have to hire 4,000 more people over the next 10 years. So now not all of them are in Vancouver, but of the 1,500 employees we have now, 1,000 are in Vancouver, pretty well. Yeah. So so there's going to be a lot of growth going forward, and see, we don't worry about our competition because our products are better, generally speaking. But we're competing with Nitrogen and or Thermo Fisher, whatever. But they don't have the concentrated manpower in the areas that we're concentrating on, right? Like I've got an army of smart young kids trying to think about how to grow cells better. They've probably got a much smaller group of people who are probably a little more older and fuddy-duddier and stuff. So, they have a lot of knowledge, though. There's no question about that. But no, we're nothing can stop us as far as I can see. We just want to keep going. And of course, now we're branching into other areas. So we have a whole group on instrumentation, which is really growing. So we've got there some robotic cell separation system, and we've come out with the RoboSep C, which is a much bigger instrument. It will go eventually clinical over time. We have a huge system for which we call a RoboCult for growing reproducibly iPS or ES cells for core labs, like big core labs like Harvard University and whatnot. Have big core labs. You want to just grow a lot of cells, right? So we're coming up with all those. So we're having a lot of fun, as well as just smaller little pieces of equipment and stuff for doing the cell homogenizing cells or breaking cells up. So there's a lot of stuff going on that links that, and of course we've got a whole plasticware thing making all the different types of wells for different applications, and we contract that out to a company here in Columbia Plastics, but we have to do all the design and everything and of the plasticware, and there's all sorts of little things that happen that we're into, right? So it's so we're growing, and of course what's happened is the whole company was based on research use only products. So that meant that we didn't have to worry about regulatory issues because they weren't going to be used for treating patients, right? So that is, but the trouble, what's happened is our media, people like it for clinical trials, and it's going to go commercial, right, in certain areas, right? So we have to make our media as GMP. So we got a grant from the federal government for $25 million and a match for the province to build a GMP manufacturing facility. Part of it, not all of it. And so we've leased a warehouse out in Burnaby, which is a 200,000 square foot warehouse, which is huge, and we got a loan from Bank Consortium for $200 million, and we're building a major facility to make clinical grade medias and cell separation products. So we've moved from research use only products to clinical grade products, and of course to do that, all the raw materials have to be carefully screened. We have to do audits of the suppliers. This is a huge thing. So now we're like a pharmaceutical company to a large extent, and it's more costly. We've got a whole group of people who are, well, we have like 100 people doing QC, retesting all our products. Another regulatory group who know all the government regulations and FDA and all that stuff. And so it's just a bigger operation, and I just see this growth continuing. So
really good.
We'll need another plant probably on the east coast of Canada or the United States, another one in Europe, because we don't want to just be shipping water back and forth by air across the Atlantic, and then we need something in China because China is growing at 50 or 60% a year. I've got about 50 people in China who work through about 25 distributors there. So and business is just booming there, and but we got offices all around the world, and distribution centers, right? So we have big distributions, like huge warehouses for all these things and big, huge freezers, and cold rooms, right? With, high, like 40-foot stacking and, lifts to take your stuff and plug it up in there. And so we got a big one like that in Vancouver. So that's out in Burnaby now. And then we got another one like that's outside of Seattle, Kent, outside of Seattle for the US market. Then we got another one in Grenoble, Grenoble, France. And then we got another one in Singapore and another one in Beijing and Shanghai. So we're all about, because we've got to have all these products and people they want to order something, they want to get it next day, ideally, right? So we have to have these big warehouses and people demand those and so on, right? Yeah. And we want to have research around the world too. So like we've got a research group in Cambridge, England. So we have a building there, and we have a group primarily working on organoids there, but we want to expand that as well. And of course, the UK is, Britain, Brexit they've broken off, right? So we probably want a research group in mainland Europe.
Yeah, mainland Europe.
Probably in the Netherlands, maybe sometime, or Germany. We haven't figured out that yet. But so we're growing. We want to be close to our customers and being able to, because having those relationships and to get the ideas of what they need so we can produce them, and also do the training and keep those relationships with our customers is really important. So you have to be near them. And so we're very much an international company.
International, yeah. Really good. Okay. Up to the next question. I'm kind of gonna mix a little bit of the questions because some of them are similar. So would you say you would, in your career, would you say you had a rough patch and in any moment you decided to quit or change job, take a totally different path from where you are now? Did you ever think about that?
Well, yeah, I've always thought about it, but so I was going to be a marine biologist originally, right? And then I realized that was really hard work. You had to go on ships, and it took you like months to do an experiment and stuff. Then I got into yeast and yeast genetics and stuff. Oh, you can make things happen really quickly. And then I saw, why don't we apply this to humans? So I better do an MD, right? I better find out. It looked like a lot of my colleagues, some of them were medical students. They were having a lot of fun too, right? So I did that, and then I did a tour of Canada, thinking I'd get a job. I had an MD, but and a master's actually in sort of yeast genetics, and nobody really wanted to hire me, right? so I had to go back because okay, you're at a PhD, but you haven't done a postdoc. Okay, so that's not good enough. You got an MD, but you haven't done a specialty. So you need to do a specialty. So Connie and I agreed that I would go and do medical oncology and hematology, and it was mostly oncology, and that took another 5 years. So time's gone by, and then once I got finished, I realized that the challenge was in research. So I didn't see patients, but then they wanted somebody to actually build a hematology group, and I was the only one that had actually publications in hematology and stuff like. So they hired me to be head of hematology, and then that evolved into building a bone marrow transplant program because that was the hot thing, right? And one thing led to another. At the same time, I was building the Terry Fox lab, and that was good. And then I had to retire, but retiring was the best thing ever because I didn't have to feel guilty about leaving the Terry Fox lab, right?
Actually, one of the questions is, if you hadn't had the option to retire, would you still be in academia? Do you think you'll have continued in Terry Fox?
I think I would have. Towards the end, even before I had to retire, I could see the potential in STEMCELL Technologies, even though it was a small company. I could see it was growing, and there was just a lot of opportunities there. So no, I would not probably have stayed in academia, right?
Yeah.
But Connie is, and of course Connie, we talk all the time, and so I get a certain amount of feedback from her in terms of sort of understanding. But it's I mean, she has a wealth of knowledge that I don't have anymore. I mean, she's, you know, so I'm more in business and managing people and stuff like that, and figuring out, where to take the company which is, a different sort of thing.
Well, I think maybe our last question that might take a little bit to answer is, what would you say is the best advice you can give scientists in formation, which knowledge or which skills they have to culture in order to actually be good at science and be scientists?
Well, I mean, you have to be smart, but virtually everybody's doing a PhD has already been screened for that, right? Which is, but then it depends on your personality, right? So I look for people that are, have a certain, they've done other things. So they, been part of like an organization like GrasPods, right? Have they, so that they actually interact with people and want to interact with people, because that is very important in industry. You're going to interact with people, and you're going to end up probably managing people, and so you got to figure out how to get those skills, right? And it's just through interactions, right? Now we have people who don't really talk very much, and they're all about doing the lab work. Yes, that's fine. And we need them too. So we have a whole spectrum. In fact, STEMCELL is a job for anybody, right? Whether you're a sort of a reclusive, person who just wants to do lab work, yes. But if you're more gregarious and want to do sales, or you're more, you want to just paint the big picture and try to think about how all these things would work out, go into marketing, and of course we have a huge IT department. If you want to get into that, we got like 50 people who are, how do we optimizing the whole process, all the processes that we're doing, right? Which is now the key to our success as a big company. So there's a zillion things you can do. Not to mention, we've got several lawyers with PhDs, and so doing patenting and licensing and stuff like that, right? So some of whom are graduates of the Terry Fox Lab. So there's a job for almost anybody in industry, and certainly in STEMCELL, because we're broad-based. And if you're like an engineering type, you want to do engineering and build, bioreactors or equipment for doing various things, we got jobs for you too. So and the reason I'm here is to recruit, because like I say, we've got 70 open positions last week, but we're just in the process of adding 80 more, right? So and we're expecting sales to really go up, because as you probably know, a lot of money has been invested into biotech. So the biotech industry is going to boom. I mean, COVID has focused investors' attention on this whole area, right? And there are all these companies, but you've got lots of choices here. You got Accelerate here. You've got Precision Nanosystems. There's a whole bunch of companies here now that are good, and we've lost some people to those companies, because we've got a lot of people already, and they're already trained up, and we have over 100 courses for people in internal courses on how to do various aspects of business and managing people and all that sort of stuff. So our people are really well trained, and as the biggest company in the city doing this sort of thing, we expect to lose a few people, but we're recruiting more, so and training them up, right, and having fun. And we have a lot of fun. Unfortunately, our Christmas concert, which is the highlight of our social year, we didn't have last year, but we rent the convention center, and we have over 1,000 people, and we've got I asked people anybody that are musical. So it turns out over the years we've got 2 rock bands, a classical group, a vocal group, and a rap group, and I think there's another group I missed. Anyway, so they perform at the Christmas concert or the Christmas dinner and stuff before and afterwards and stuff. So there's a sense of community and having fun. It has to be fun to do research and yeah. So okay. It's yeah.
Awesome. So I guess we've reached 4:15 and people are starting to log off. So I think we will reach the end of the interview. But
Okay.
thank you so much for joining us, Alan.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
We learned so much.
Yeah,
Good.
insightful.
Okay. Well, when you're looking for a job, come and see me.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Connie has students graduating soon, so
I know.
I don't know.
Yeah, we got lots of positions. It's all coming up.
Okay, awesome, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Alan, again, and thanks.
Bye.
It was a good afternoon. Awesome, thank you.